Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. Today, it's really exciting to have everyone here as we talk a little bit about declaring independence from non-emergency calls. I'm your host, I'm Max Keenan. I'm the founder of Aurelian. I started Aurelian about 4 years ago now. Originally, I'd actually planned to come in like an Uncle Sam costume, which I coincidentally already have because I'm going to a World Cup game. But it was aggressively vetoed. So we are here normally talking a little bit about really call surges and reducing non-emergency call volume in these, you know, often high concentration events. And the most obvious of these is the 4th of July. For me, for us, really, the 4th of July is kind of like my Super Bowl. It's the most exciting day of the year. It's really, I feel like, in many ways, the best day of the year to show the value of automating non-emergency calls. And the thing about it is, like, these call surges can actually happen at any time, sadly. And it's exciting because I think the 4th of July is the most predictable, the one we can prepare for the most. But it's often about like being able to kind of make these adjustments as needed. And today I'm joined by three wonderful panelists. I'll let them introduce themselves. Leanne, can you kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Leanne Slaughter. I am with the Summit Emergency Communications Center, located in Talmadge, Ohio, by Akron. And I'm a deputy director here over operations.
And I'm Samantha Fickus. I'm also here at Summit Emergency Communications Center and our Deputy Director of Administration.
Yeah, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending upon your time zone. Johnny Leonard, I'm the Deputy Director for Dane County Public Safety Communications, located in Madison, Wisconsin.
And I'm really excited to have all three of them kind of talking with me about this. There's been two significant surge events that they've dealt with that we'll kind of dive into a little bit. But at a high level, beyond that, they're just three of my favorite people in 911. And so this is a good excuse to get the gang together and talk a little bit about this. Really, first, I want to talk a little bit about on the 4th of July, the actual calls that you guys are fielding. And I'll kind of kick this off a little bit to Samantha. What's it like on the floor?
I love what you have right there on the screenshot because it's a lot of fireworks complaints, but a lot of them do definitely come in as their gunshots, even though it is July 4th, and people will swear up and down that they know it's a gun when it most of the time is fireworks. But you're also dealing with a lot of parties, a lot of intoxicated people. You get intoxicated people with fireworks, and that can also become a really big mess. And another thing that we deal with is because we're a consolidated center and Ohio has legalized fireworks, but it's up to the communities if they actually want it legalized or not. So some of our communities, fireworks are legal on 4th of July, some of them they are not. So our dispatchers also have to keep track of that and know who is allowed to set off fireworks and who's not. The time frames on that, so only allowed to do it between certain hours. So the dispatchers are kind of shuffling a lot of things at one time.
And Johnny, and you're in, obviously, Madison, beautiful area. I imagine lots of 4th of July festivities. July in Madison is probably one of the best times of the year to be there. How do you guys like deal with it?
Yeah, I think Samantha made a great point with the Consolidated Communication Center because we're also consolidated. So over 21 different law enforcement agencies, your major municipalities, they tend to use the non-emergency line for things that are more legitimate law enforcement concerns, whereas a smaller agency may advertise that 10-digit number and it's Mrs. Smith calling to get information about the parade or what's this event that's going on, at the town square, things that our folks, quite frankly, don't have access to or the bandwidth to deal with. So you get more of those kind of miscellaneous information requests, but also because you've got more people out partying and enjoying the weather, you have more legitimate law enforcement and fire and EMS needs, right? So, like you said, it's a very hectic day all the way around.
And so I talked about it as if it's my Super Bowl. I imagine it's not like a celebration on the floor. What are the feelings going into the 4th? How do you convince people to work it?
Yeah.
You pay them overtime because it's a holiday.
I was going to say holiday pay helps,
Yeah,
yes.
it does.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, I think it's not everyone's favorite day to work for sure because they know it's going to be a lot of these fireworks complaints. and they know it's most likely going to be a busy shift.
Yeah. And sometimes we know in the dispatch centers somewhat get caught in the middle because they get caught in the middle between the public and then the people that they're dispatching that aren't going to go, but that doesn't stop the public from still calling in, and they're smack dab in the middle of it. And then depending on the shift, we have some of them that just absolutely dread driving home because they are going to hit all the egress traffic from the events that are happening in the area or on their route home too. So we have some that plan out a completely different route to get home just so that they don't get in all the traffic.
Yeah, I love that point because like every year in Washington, a sheriff comes out and says, "Hey, this is the year we're going to enforce the fireworks ban." And of course, it's like impossible to enforce, to be honest. And so what ends up happening is you have all these people who think it's now being enforced, and then they call the non-emergency line, and then nothing happens. And so it ends up being kind of a frustrating combo for both of them. But a piece I want to transition into a little bit is like, how do you actually prepare for it? Samantha, you mentioned, mandatory overtime sometimes, or you mentioned kind of like offering the additional holiday pay. How are you actually prepping for this?
We try to gather from all our communities what events they're having. We do put together the fireworks laws for people. I know we're going to get into this, but we have this past last year was the first year we had a Aurelian. So we really leveraged that to give our citizens information, which I know Leanne can talk a lot more about. But they kind of know what they're getting into. It's just how bad is it going to be? But we
Yeah.
try to give them as much information ahead of time as possible so that they're not finding out on Facebook, because that's kind of the worst is when they find out about a community event because it's on Facebook and we didn't tell them. So reaching out to our communities and making sure they're informing us of what's going on so we can inform the dispatchers.
And then how do you give that to the dispatchers? Do you kind of do like a pre-shift read of like, hey, this is what we're getting into?
It's the list that never ends. The accessibility goes hand in hand with that because we can gather all the information that we can gather, but them having the ability to access it and find it quickly. We leverage Aurelian a lot for that, to be honest. We've learned to do that. In the past, it was just a list.
Yeah, it was an email that was sent to them and then they could print it out or, get to it easily on their computer. This year, I'm hoping to also leverage Cora, the other part of Aurelian, so that it just pops up in front of their face. So they don't even have to go look for it. It's just there.
Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, we love Cora. Cora is what we call our Aurelian Ava. Our non-emergency answering is Ava, and Cora is her sister. Cora is basically kind of protocols light, is what I like to call it. So every time a dispatcher answers the phone, whether it's emergency or non-emergency, like it listens to the call, knows what kind of call type it is, and then lists out the questions for the dispatchers that they should be asking for that kind of call. But Cora also has what's called alerts. So if someone does get through Aurelian and is asking about fireworks call times or making a complaint about fireworks being going off, the alert can pop up that we enter into Cora that shows fireworks, and then we can have each city listed, like these are the hours they're allowed to do it. They're not allowed to do it in the city. So that we can easily answer those questions or know if we need to make a call for service. And the dispatchers don't have to go look for it because it'll pop up in front of their face as soon as Cora hears the word fireworks, and they'll have it right there for them. So it's a lot faster and there's a lot less dead air time on the phone while they're trying to find that information, which then usually makes our callers a little bit happier. They think the dispatchers know what they're doing. So it's just really amazing and helpful.
I didn't know we were actually doing that for you guys right now. So that's actually like really exciting to hear that you guys are doing that for the fireworks side. It makes sense to kind of pop up those SOPs immediately rather than having them have to go through your SharePoint, which I've seen a few times. Johnny, I'm curious on the staffing side. How are you guys staffing up for the 4th? Are you normally going, 30% over your normal staffing? What are you normally doing?
It kind of varies depending upon day of the week and depending upon what the weather's looking like, but I really do kind of compare it to weather events where you get this update from the National Weather Service that there's a high potential of weather, right? So if you staff up and it's not enough, they're going to say, well, why didn't you staff us up more? And if you staff up and then nothing happens, you've got a bunch of people sitting there going, well, I could be home on the 4th of July with friends and family barbecuing, but I'm here and it's dead at work, right? So it's really tough no matter what you do, whether it's a planned event like this or it's a weather event. You never quite feel like you hit the mark if you're just going based off of staffing and trying to staff up for something like that.
Yeah. I have a feeling this one's going to be a bad year because it falls on a Saturday. So
Exactly.
you better hope it rains in Madison. That's all I have to say.
Right. Yeah.
It's the
Now,
250.
the piece of this that you hit on, Johnny, I want to talk a little bit about more is sometimes like when you can't really prepare. And there's really two events here, and we'll kind of dive into them a little bit separately. We have a really bad storm that hit SCCC kind of out of nowhere. And then we have the Ridgeland Farm incident, which we can talk about a lot more. I'm sure some of you have heard about that. Some of you might have not. I'm kind of passing it off to you all. Tell me a little bit about this. What kind of happened on this normal, day?
Well, it was Friday the 13th,
Of
and
course.
Samantha and I were gearing down our week and ready to head home.
It was about 3:30 in the afternoon. We usually end about 4.
Yeah, and you had went into the room, I think, right? And
Yeah, I have my CAD up in my office,
Mhm.
and we have our CAD makes an audible noise when we have fire calls pending. And I heard it go off about 4 times in a row, and I'm like, that's odd. So I walked in the room to see what was happening, and they said, oh, a storm's coming in, we're getting a little busy. And then I don't know, about 3 minutes later, all HE double hockey sticks broke loose, and we just got slammed. We have 11 communities, and the storm hit all 11 of them.
yeah, so
And
it went from 0 to 1,000 very quickly.
And I think like we see this a little bit with the call volume. So this is like a breakdown of that call volume from, week over week for that 2.5 hour period. I think
Mhm.
it's 3:30 right the way up to 6. This is kind of insane. So you guys go from, 100, basically 5x non-emergency call volume and 5 or 6x 911 call volume, just like that. And so
Yeah.
it seemed like in this case, this wasn't like a hurricane. This kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
even know if we knew a storm was coming.
Yeah, and it didn't look that terrible outside either, like before we went into the room and saw what was really going on. So we have the 17 positions that can be manned, and every single one of them, we grabbed anybody that had a headset out in the admin hallway, and our trainer, record supervisor, like it was all hands on deck so that we could expand out and try and help the floor with what they had going on.
Yeah, we also paged very quickly for overtime to get people to come in to help with the storm. So once that page was sent, it's actually pretty funny because we had a training class in the classroom, and Leanne had sent the page and told them to call her cell phone, not to call into the room because you wouldn't get through. And she handed the phone off to one of our brand new trainees who hasn't even worked the floor yet. I was like, let me know if my phone rings. But 9 people called within that 5 minutes willing to come in and help, which I thought was amazing. But we only had so much space. So we took the first 4 people who offered. So they came in to kind of relieve us because myself, Leanne, like she said, our training coordinator, our record supervisor, they all came in and sat in a spot, answering phones. We also had to break out our fire dispatchers because we have 2 fire departments, or I'm sorry, 2 fire dispatchers for 8 fire departments, but 2 people could not handle that. So we end up having to break it out to have 4 fire dispatchers. We normally have 4 call takers on afternoons. So we added, I believe, 3 or 4 more call takers, with us coming in and then people coming in over time to help with the call volume, which is still never enough because we had 511 non-emergency calls. There's no way that every one of those calls could get answered. That's almost 5 calls per minute. So there's no way humans could possibly answer that many phone calls, which is where it really came in handy because all those calls did get answered, every single one of them. And that would never have happened before. In my past, I worked for a dispatch center where all the electric calls came into dispatch because it was a local electric department. And we would only have 2 or 3 people working, and there was just no way. So many calls went unanswered, and so many 911 calls. went unanswered. And we didn't really run into that in the storm because Aurelian answered all the non-emergencies. So all those people on the floor were able to answer those 911s first and foremost, which is always our biggest goal.
Yeah. So I guess two things on that. One, kudos to the team for everyone coming in, like literally driving through the storm.
Yes, it was amazing.
Uh,
One person actually had scheduled like a vacation day, but then said, yeah, I'll be right in. And he came in anyway, and he was supposed to be off on vacation.
And he had a tree blocking the road. Right after he
Yes.
called in, he called right back to the trainee and said, my neighbors are helping me move the tree. I'll be there. It was insane.
that's awesome on them. I guess a question for me is like, why were people calling? Like obviously 911, that makes sense. Why were people calling the admin lines?
It was a lot of trees down, trees blocking the roadways, wires down. Some of them were power outage calls. As I said, one of our agencies, it is a local power department. So we have been trying to get them trained to call now a power number and not dispatch, but it's only been 2.5 years. And unfortunately, old habits die hard. So some of those people are still really used to calling the police non-emergency line when their power's out. But luckily we already had a Aurelian set up. So if anyone calls out for a power outage in any jurisdiction, it automatically routes them to their power company. And that doesn't even come in to dispatch at all. But a lot of it was wires down and trees down.
The lady I had was stuck in an elevator because the power had went out, but the elevator phone called the non-emergency line. So once Ava identified that, I believe, then passed it through, and that was somebody that I had gotten. But it was
And
just constant.
so in that case, like she called in basically with an emergency to the non-emergency line. Uh, and I don't know if you would even classify that necessarily as an emergency. I think I would probably classify that as an emergency. Maybe
Probably
not in
more
this.
emergent being stuck in an elevator.
She didn't
Yeah,
like
maybe not in this circumstance.
it. She definitely didn't like it, but
And so she calls him the elevator phone to the non-emergency line. The AI takes the call, and then it actually transferred to you, and then you ended up dispatching fire.
Correct. Yeah, so the way we have Aurelian set up is if Aurelian detects it's an emergent call by certain questions we have set up. So for the wires down, if it's arcing or sparking, then it would transfer into dispatch because that could be a potential fire. Or if the tree was down blocking a roadway, that would transfer into dispatch. But if the tree's just down in your front yard, Aurelian would take all the information and then the dispatchers could create a call for service. And we still go out, but that's obviously going to be more non-emergent and it's going to be lower level of what we dispatch out to our fire departments or police departments.
and by
Yeah.
virtue of how that all worked, though, that's how that went, right? The 911s and the calls coming in were answered first, and then we spent quite a bit of time going back through the action items that were delivered on the dashboard to get the rest of the lower priority admin calls and calls for service that were coming in.
Because this is the piece that I always think is interesting. Is like when these non-emergency calls come in during the storm, like you're not even you can't even do anything about them in the moment.
Right.
Correct.
Like, and so they kind of like they end up bogging down the actual emergency response, but like you can't even deal with them necessarily. It's funny, like on the one extreme I've seen agencies do in moments like this is they'll literally just turn off the non-emergency line. And they'll say, hey, we have a storm surge right now, things are happening, you need to call 911. But Leanne, to your point, what happens when that random elevator phone dials that non-emergency line?
Yeah. We don't
Then that person,
necessarily
yeah,
not want them to get the attention that they need, right? They're
yeah,
still important calls and we want to get them the help that they need. It just gave us another layer of a way to prioritize it.
Mhm.
I mean,
yeah,
it could have been, I don't know how many minutes after things kind of started calming down, or we had somebody able to, more people, because they were freed up from the phones now going through those action items. We still want that information, but if it wasn't parked on that dashboard per se in that parking lot of action items, it wouldn't have gotten maybe captured because that person may have not hung on while the phone was ringing
Right.
or not have gotten answered because we were in there for hours, just constant. We weren't even just one call after another, after there was no break. And those admin lines were still getting answered and that information was still being collected without
yeah.
even touching us. And we didn't have the bandwidth to do that.
And there could have also been more backlash to communities if you did something like turn off the non-emergency, or if the non-emergency is on, but we don't have a really in, so we just can't answer the phone. And like Leanne said, someone hangs up because they just get frustrated, keeps ringing. If you don't think that those mayors or city council people or whatnot might be not hear about that the next day, the complaints from their citizens that, hey, no one answered my call. So with Aurelian, someone is answering the call and they were getting a response. It may not have been as quickly as they like because it's a storm surge, but it's better than nobody answering and there being no response at all.
Yeah, and the piece of that I really like that you mentioned is when these incidents happen, like if they don't get an answer on the non-emergency line or the non-emergency line is turned off, these people just call 911.
Right. And then the real
And
emergencies really can't get through.
exactly. And then like you basically have lost any semblance of prioritization. Um, well, no, thank you for sharing. I remember when this happened. I remember it happened because we have like an alert on our side and it triggers if call volume is much different than expected.
Like, oh, what's going on over
Uh,
there?
and I remember being like, yeah, what's going on over there? And then seeing, everything hitting the fan. I want to like switch gears a little bit into almost like a slightly different story with what happened, actually a few days later, 500 miles away in Madison County, Wisconsin. Johnny, can you tell me a little bit about Ridgeland Farms? Can you tell me a little bit about this incident?
Yeah, so essentially, Ridgeland Farms is a U.S. Department of Agricultural licensed research facility on the west side of Dane County. At the time of this event, they had over or about 2,000 beagles at the site, and the beagles are used for medical research. But this particular facility also was breeding the beagles to sell them to other research facilities. They lost that license on June 1st, but that was a part of a pre-agreed upon plan. So some animal rights activists Sunday, March 15th, decided they wanted to go break into the facility and rescue some of these beagles. So we were first notified of this with a call to 911 from the facility itself saying, hey, we've got people breaking into the facility with crowbars. They're filming, they were live streaming the event, it turns out. I think they got their hands on probably 30 dogs. Were able to get them outside of the facility. They were met by sheriff's deputies who were able to return 22 of those dogs back to the facility, and I think 8 of them were ultimately taken elsewhere by these animal rights activists. So that occurs Sunday morning, makes the news, but it's not that widespread of an event. Turns out that this group was fairly well coordinated on social media. So they have the live stream videos, they have their call to action for people online. Throughout Sunday evening into Monday, which, oh, by the way, was a snowstorm. We got about 10 inches of snow, so dealing with all those calls. Throughout the day, Monday, call volume starts to ramp up. And doing some investigating Tuesday morning, we're seeing people on Instagram and Facebook that have 500,000 followers, close to 1 million followers, advertising our 10-digit non-emergency line saying, give the sheriff's office a piece of your mind, let them know that they should close down Ridgeland Farms. And again, our 10-digit non-emergency number plastered on social media. So we were told that a lot of calls that were coming in were related to Ridgeland Farms. What is a lot, right? Is that 50 calls? Is that 100 calls? Everyone has a little bit of a different threshold for what that means. But I was on the operations floor Tuesday morning, standing by 2 call takers, and 8 straight calls that they took between the 2 of them were related to Ridgeland Farms. And I said, oh, we've got a problem here. Like we need to come up with a solution to get our center back, right? Open the lines back up for the residents of Dane County, because we were getting calls internationally.
Yeah, and so a piece of this that I think is interesting is two things. This is a recurring problem I always see is that people don't know that the dispatch center is not, in this case, is not the sheriff's office.
Mm-hmm.
And like these callers, they're not being like malicious, they're not trying to harass the PSAP. Um, but they are in many ways talking to people who have no control over what happened.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important point in all of this because, again, really good social media usage on behalf of the folks that were organizing this event. They had their call to action. They have a passionate base of people that care about what's going on at that facility. And the vast majority of the callers were very receptive when they were told, hey, licensing is actually done by the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The sheriff's office has nothing to do with that process. We can point you in the right direction. Most people were incredibly receptive. It was just the sheer volume of calls that were coming in for us.
And Jen, I think what was kind of interesting here is like, I think in this moment, you texted someone on our team, Scott Rainmaker, and I can't remember exactly what you said. I think you said something about the fact along the lines of, "I've got like a crazy idea," which I think is always like the best ideas probably already start with this. Uh, walk me through kind of like you realize we probably need to accelerate this a little bit. You realize you have a problem at hand. How did we try to like work together to change this?
Yeah, definitely. So, a really interesting piece of context for this is we were not live with Aurelian. We are still not fully live with Aurelian. We're still in the testing phases, but we were deep enough in the process that I knew the technical piece was there. I knew the connections had been made. So I called Scott and I said, can we turn on Aurelian and simply have the greeting say, are you calling about Ridgeland Farms or something else? And if they're calling about something else, they get immediately put through to a communicator. But if they say they're calling about Ridgeland Farms, we can have a call route built out that it offers to text them the press release from the sheriff's office, that offers to give them the number to the state Department of Agriculture, that offers to give them the number to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We had all of these resources preloaded in there due to the work that the sheriff's office was trying to do, but their local press release was not hitting people in Scotland and Australia and all these places that were calling us, right? So within an hour and a half, we had that route stood up, we had the system live, and we sat there on a conference call and said, okay, we're going to turn this on for the first time in Dane County. Let's see what happens. And within the first 5 minutes that we were live with the system, the next 13 calls were all related to Ridgeland Farms. Every single one of them was triaged by the system. They were texted the resource they needed. They were given the direct line that they needed to a phone number that had been stood up at that point by the sheriff's office. But we saw in real time how it was protecting our call takers from those calls, right? That they were just going to have to redirect elsewhere anyway.
Yeah. And then I guess like how long did it take to kind of go from, hey, we have this idea to, hey, we're not even live. We're not even taking calls at all to like spinning this up and actually trying to deflect some of those calls.
Yeah, it was about an hour and a half from the time that we actually connected to being able to do that, and we are very appreciative for multiple folks on your team. I'll give Scott and Frank both a shout out specifically. They were so willing to go with this idea and say, yeah, I think we can get this done. We know how important this is. Let's try to turn this thing on and see what happens, right? And then real quick crash course education for our supervisors to say, hey, we need you to monitor the portal and see what's going on. But it was so interesting in real time to see some of the scenarios that presented themselves and really became like proof of concept for our center with Aurelian. We had one caller. He said, I'm calling about Ridgeland Farms, but it's related to a missing person. And when he said missing person, the call was passed through to a communicator. And what he conveyed to the communicator was, well, I guess I'm reporting a missing person because nobody at the Wisconsin Office of Agriculture is answering the phone. So I guess I need to report somebody missing there. But the system correctly was like, okay, we might have an issue, right? We
Yeah.
also had someone who called in and they said, I'm calling about Ridgeland Farms. I'm concerned about the health of the dogs. When they give birth, they're very weak. And the system heard give birth and said, well, that could be an emergency, and passed it through to a communicator thinking there was possibly someone reporting like a childbirth, right? So really, really cool proof of concept to see the things that people were calling about and what the system was able to recognize as a potential emergency.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And then this ended up like spreading out over like a relatively like a surprisingly long period. I thought this was going to be like maybe a 2 or 3 day thing. Like historically, when we see things like this, it's usually, hey, the sheriff said something online, and now there's a lot of auditors that are calling in. But this one, it felt like it was like weeks.
Yeah, it really was. And again, it was interesting, right? How this thing had such a long tail online as far as going viral and kind of getting extra traction online. So we had the system turned on for, I believe it was a full week, starting with that March 17th date that we actually turned the system on. Traditional non-emergency call volume for us in a 24-hour period, right around 500 calls, just to make it a nice even number. In that first 24 hours, we had almost 1,500 calls pass through Aurelian, and I say pass through, 1,500 hit Aurelian. 70% of those never even came through to a communicator because they were related to Ridgeland Farms. So we were able to triage all of those calls, but we noticed that increased call volume did keep up for about 7 days. Once we hit a tipping point of about 50% of the calls were related to Ridgeland Farms is when we went back to regular service and answering the non-emergency line the way we traditionally would, because we had some additional safeguards in place. But then, if you would like me to get into it, they called their shot and said, well, we'll be back in April. We're going to bring 2,000 people because there's 2,000 dogs, and with 30 people, we got 30 dogs out. So let's do this again. We didn't get nearly as many calls on that one, which was really interesting. And the social media impact was a little bit different. It was more related to some of the licensing stuff, and people had the proper resource. But yeah, it's still ongoing for us. They've now actually kind of twisted the arm of the facility, and 1,500 of the dogs have been relocated. But we really anticipate there will be another event out there where they break in and try to get the rest of the dogs.
Yeah, I remember at some point it looked like it was like a war scene where there was like this moat around. Can you tell me about that a little bit?
Yeah, so in the lead up to the event, the facility was tipped off as to what was going to happen. So they said, well, we're going to dig this large moat around the facility. We're going to get these very large hay bales and put them up in the front of the fences. We've got barbed wire on top of the fences. We've got barbed wire inside the fences. They hired additional security. So we really had concerns about the escalation of this, right? And how quickly it could kind of get out of control. It was kind of humorous that the first two guys to get there took a ladder, placed it across this little moat, got to one of the hay bales, rolled it back into the moat, and now they had a flat surface to walk across. So in about 5 minutes, they had gotten past the high tech defenses there. But yeah, we had sheriff's deputies inside the fence, and we had people cutting through the fence, actively getting arrested for burglary charges because they were cutting through fences right in front of sheriff's deputies. It was kind of interesting. But at that point, it was all contained on scene. We weren't really getting
Yeah.
the additional calls otherwise.
This is like a medieval war. I'm surprised. Like, was the
Yeah,
trebuchet there? Like,
exactly. Yeah.
that's unbelievable. So we get a question from the audience. Cheryl Kagan asked, like, curious, how is the press informed or engaged about like you using AI on the non-emergency line, kind of in a whim moment, and how'd you guys kind of think through that?
So, full transparency, we didn't really announce any of that in the moment because so many of these calls were coming from uh, people outside of Dane County. And I want to go back to something that you spoke about earlier about the thought process and like when do we flip the switch on, do we turn off our non-emergency line? For us, because the callers were not in Dane County, there was a fleeting moment of like, if residents of Dane County need to get through, they can call the 911 number. We can remind our partners regionally that we have a 10-digit emergency line that's not advertised to the public, so they would still be able to get through. I mean, it almost became like a denial of service attack, right? That wasn't the intention of the people that were calling, but there was a fleeting moment where we considered that. Now, for our full go live, I had a meeting this morning with someone on your marketing team talking about how we're going to do a press release, how we're going to inform the public that this is what we're looking to do. And I really think it's about the framing because there's just not a lot of knowledge out there in the general public that the same people that answer those 911 lines are answering the non-E lines, right? And they're getting tied up on those calls. So I really think it's about being clear with what the objective is and what the why is. And keeping people freed up. In our center, we're really big on CPR instructions, right? Hands on chest. Our save rate is almost twice the national average. We can't do that if we're tied up on a non-E call. So I think the why behind it is really, really important.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. I think like one of the things I was interesting when I was looking through the calls of like the activists calling in is like how respectful they were to the AI. which like proved to me that it was like purely just like almost like a miscommunication on who to call and like where to actually get the resources and not like an intentional denial of service action. Um,
Exactly.
but this was I thought this was like one of the most interesting stories, mostly because I was like watching it from afar and then seeing kind of like the day-to-day impact. For the few days kind of before you had this crazy idea, and kudos to you. What was it like on the floor?
It's funny. It almost, because of the way it ramped up throughout Sunday, and then with the snowstorm hitting on Monday, there almost wasn't time for it to register, like maybe the higher volume of calls or what was going on. It was once we got back to like business as usual, if you will, on Tuesday morning, was when people really started feeling the weight of it, and feeling how many of these calls were coming in. And there was a lot of exclamations of like, if I have to talk about beagles one more time, or like, I've never learned so much about state licensing, like just weird things that you don't sign up for, right? Um, but I mean, the tension that left the room when we actually turned Aurelian on and were able to triage those calls was incredible. Like, I wish I could bottle that emotion. And I remember Wednesday morning, I was talking to, no, actually, it was Tuesday afternoon. I was talking to one of our communicators who had gone through the past couple of days. And he looked up at me for a second and he goes, Johnny, no one in the center is on a call right now. And I go, yeah, we haven't been able to say that for a couple of days, have we? But literally, no one was on the phones because Aurelian was doing its thing.
It was like this is like one of the moments that just made the team so excited, like as a whole. Like because it's like this is kind of what we not that we want, like this is why we do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate you sharing stories to us about some of the stuff, some of the impact that we had in a short moment. It was just really exciting.
Yeah.
Like being able to actually hear like how this helped the team. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah,
Any other
absolutely.
questions for the panelists before we kind of start wrapping things up? I'll obviously save some time for the end too, but wanted to give a call out for the audience. These are, I think, two of my favorite stories. One of them, is somewhat predictable. You know the storm is going to happen at some point. On the other end, I did not have a beagle farm being invaded in a medieval warfare style that was not on my list at all. And it's kind of interesting, but like in many ways, like the way you prepare for it is actually like pretty much the same, which is like sometimes you literally just can't. And I think like for us, like the piece is like, how do you make sure that I always say like everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. My favorite Mike Tyson quote. How do you make sure that you can react fast enough so that in those moments you know what to do? And the piece with this is I always think about it, is like no matter what, like you are going to have these moments. And there's always going to be cases that you could never really imagine. And so I think a lot of it is like, how do you plan to be reactive? How do you plan to be quick in these moments and make those adjustments on the fly and drive the best outcomes? Um, but great. Thank you all for joining us. I want to leave a minute for any questions from the audience. Um, Cheryl, I appreciate you sending one. Otherwise, thank you for joining us. Thank you for talking about this. Thank you for sharing a little bit about your centers and some of the things that you're focusing on and things that you're done. Um, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here.
We appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you guys. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.